Drawing room over here.
Oh, hey, come on in. With multiple bands and a long list of well-known musicians on his session list, Nick Garbutt's trumpet is a part of the Australian sound. A few years ago, after receiving a prestigious Friedman Jazz Fellowship, Nick relocated to a small island off Italy and started recording with his longtime friend Mike Makovsky in Berlin. The result is a unique new album called The Glider, and Nick is my guest in the drawing room. Nick, welcome.
Hi, Patricia. It's great to be on the show.
So take me on your path to music. You went to the Con in Sydney, so I imagine you knew pretty early on that this was what you wanted.
Yeah. I think it was sort of late in high school. I made the decision that I wanted to be a musician. I'm from down towards Wollongong, a small town called Otford. And so I was going to the Wollongong Conservatorium, playing in some jazz bands there. And then went on to the Sydney Con. It's actually where I met Mike Makovsky, who I made this record with.
So knowing you want, that you actually want it is one thing. Being skilled enough to get there is the next step. But how do you take that next step and actually make it happen?
It's tricky, and it wasn't until I left university that I really started to learn how to be a musician. I think there's so much more to it than just being able to play your instrument. I think it's a very social industry. So they say being able to hang is really important, and also being able to sort of open your ears to lots of different styles of music, and also. The touring thing is tiring and exhausting, so being able to do that was a learning curve for me as well.
So you were based in Lampedusa in Italy while you were recording this album, as well as your last solo album, actually. What took you over there?
So in 2018, we moved to Italy. My wife and I. She's Italian. She's from the north of Italy, but the reason why we moved there is she was offered a job with a UN organization called IOM, which is a migration-focused organization. And she was offered a job on Lampedusa because in more recent times, Lampedusa is really famous for migration, refugees trying to reach Europe by boat. It's actually the most southern point of Europe. It's right out in the Mediterranean, very close to Tunisia and Libya. And so that's how we ended up in Lampedusa. I followed her over there. It was a really great career opportunity, and it was a real experience. Lots of positive things. I saw a lot of quite sad things too. So, and it gave me a lot of time to work on writing music.
Does your location and what's happening around you in your life influence your music?
Yeah, definitely. Environments, at least for me, it's very important. It always has been. I've never been a city person. I've always tried to live outside of the city because I get a lot of inspiration from my environment. But Lampedusa, not only just the physical, like it was a very strange land for me. I didn't speak the language. And so I was quite isolated. So I had a lot of time to explore other music styles. So it was a huge influence, not just the environment, but the time I had being there.
So how did this particular collaboration come about then? You're in Lampedusa, away from your normal bands, and suddenly heading to Berlin to record? How did that come about?
Yeah, I'd been touring to Berlin several years previous to moving to Italy, and Mike Makovsky, who was living there in Berlin. We used to play in a band called the Vampires together, and I'd been wanting to link up with Mike and do a project like this. So it was perfect, and Berlin too excited me. It was the polar opposite kind of place to Lampedusa. So I was able to, it'd take me about a day of travel to get there from the island, but then I was in the big city, and also I knew a great drummer named Tony Buck was living there. Some listeners might know Tony from the Necks and many other projects. So I was really keen to collaborate with Tony as well. And through those guys, I met other musicians who were on this album. Yeah.
And what were you and Mike talking about when you were sort of deciding what you wanted for this record? Was there a particular plan?
Originally, the plan was just to go into the studio and play songs that I'd written, which is what I've always been used to doing with the different bands I've been involved in. But while I was on the island, I discovered some music, an album in particular called Fourth World by John Hassell and Brian Eno. And that music really blew my mind, and I went down a rabbit hole and got right into that style, which is much more ambient, a lot more electronics involved, open grooves and that sort of thing. And so I got excited, and I said, Mike, I want to do something like this. And I know that those guys there, Mike and Tony, Steve Heather, who's the percussionist on the album, they've got a lot of experience playing similar styles. So I said, how can we do this? And yeah, it was an adventure, actually, the whole process.
And what else did you want to bring in for the album? You mentioned Tony Buck, but he's not the only drummer involved here.
No, so there's 3 drummers on the record. Another drummer from Sydney, an old friend of both Mike and I, his name's Finn Ryan, and he was living in Berlin as well. He just moved from a similar part of the coast where I live to Berlin. And then Steve Heather, he's a great percussionist and drummer. So the idea was to have big percussive rhythm beds and lots of bass, and then we'd just sort of paint other colours over the top of it. So that was the idea of having all the drummers involved.
Your trumpet on this album has been heavily affected. What's it like to step away from the traditional sound of the instrument? Does it take a bit of getting used to?
Oh, definitely. And that was quite a new thing for me too. I've been sort of mucking around with synthesizers and effects on the trumpet for a few years, but never really delved into it. So that was a whole new direction for me too. And you do need to get used to it. The synthesizers work better depending on how much volume you put through them. So you really have to kind of you have to be careful not to play too hard. But also it changes the way you play. Playing less works much better with the synthesizers, with the effects pedals. So it does. It's another learning curve for me for sure.
On Radio National, this is The Drawing Room, and my guest tonight is Nick Garbett. He's talking about his new album. So, Nick, we're about to hear Mid Mountains from your album. What should we know about this one?
Yeah, this is it's the whole melody. Everything's based around the bass line on this, but it actually. While we were producing this particular track, I was no longer living on the island down in Lampedusa, and we'd moved up to a small town called Asiago, which is right up the top of Italy, in the Veneto region. You sort of got views of the Dolomites in the background, and so that environment was very inspiring making this track, and that's where the name comes from, Mid Mountains. So I think Dolomites and pine forests and mushroom hunting.
All right, I've got a total picture now. Thank you. Let's hear it. This is Nick Garbett and Mike Makovsky with Mid Mountains. That was Mid Mountains by Nick Garbett. and Mike Makovsky. And Nick is my guest in the drawing room. So, Nick, you said that you needed to play less when you're working with synths. Is that hard when you come from a background of jazz solos?
Yeah, it is. It's definitely an adjustment. But the music I was listening to at the time was very much based around minimalist approach, I guess, and also Mike's approach to music is very much from that background. So it's great because you focus on the melody more. I guess that's what I'm generally doing on this album. There's not a lot of jazz improvisation per se. It's definitely there's jazz influences, but it's much more focused on the melody.
And I believe the production of this album was a bit of a different experience for you as well. What was it like moving away from the live in the studio style?
Yeah, it was exciting, actually. That's, like you say, the live in the studio thing has always been my approach to recording music. This was much more of an improvisation from the very start. We started with 2 days in the studio with just the drummers, and Mike on the second day joined on bass, and we recorded hours and hours of improvised drums, and then we'd take that away and we'd cut it up and find the little bits that we really liked, and then we'd go back into the studio, layer more sounds on top of that, and then same process over and over. For about a year we did that, and the songs would reveal themselves after about months in the studio, actually. So it was exciting, and I learned a lot. I learned a lot from Mike about music production stuff I hadn't not really delved into previously. So it was great fun.
I imagine that session work and touring are a big part of the job when you're a musician. Was it possible to keep that up when you moved? It must have felt quite strange to set it aside.
Yeah, not at all. I didn't do any touring. I probably played a few live gigs in Italy while we were there. So I mean, it was nice to have a break. I was quite busy before I left with touring and teaching and some recording work, and which I love. But it was nice to have a break. It gives you space to discover new things, I guess, which was really positive. But that's kind of dragged on for a long time now into the pandemic. So it's tougher these days not being able to tour.
It's a pretty hard time being a musician, releasing an album in the time of COVID and lockdowns, and you can't get on the road. What's that been like?
Yeah, look, that's an existential question, Patricia. It's really tough. It's been 2 years for me now because I was in Italy last year, and it was really, the situation was terrible there, and there was obviously no performance opportunities or work opportunities. And now here in Australia, it's the same situation. And I've always been a musician, so it's the first time I've really felt quite insecure about the future, my future as a musician. I'm definitely exploring other potential career paths. I mean, I'll always play music and be involved, but it's kind of ground shaking. I'm sure a lot of other musicians and performing artists and people in this industry would be feeling the same thing right now. I don't know what the answer is, but it's tough.
Yeah, that's a massive thing to even contemplate. And obviously you've only gone there because you feel like you have to, but it must be really tough to think about it. Yeah,
it is. I'm hoping we can get back to it sooner than later, but it's not looking good. I mean, it may be well into next year. Who knows? So I think I'm trying to stay positive and see that, learning some other skills is actually exciting too. So, yeah.
It's a good approach. You've got to be positive. There's not a lot of other options. That's the truth. So let's end on a happy note because we must, okay? I always ask my musical guests to introduce us to a song that they love. What have you picked?
Yeah, this is a tune by Plainface, which is a project by Danny Pliner. tune's called Duke Flukem. So Danny's actually a really close friend of mine, and he's just an incredible musician. He's one of those musicians that he's a secret weapon. If you have Danny Pliner in your band, then everything's going to be okay. And this project's a relatively new project, Plain Face, for Danny, and it's just beautiful music. It's incredible music, and I think more people need to hear it.
Nick, lovely to talk to you. Thanks so much.
Oh, thanks, Patricia. Really appreciate it.
Nick Garbett has been my guest in the drawing room. His new album with Mike Makovsky is called The Glider, and it's out now. Now let's have a listen to the track he's picked for us. This is Plain Face with Duke Flukem.
You're going to have to put some more money in. Again? I got to make a living, kiddo. Terror. Now, where?